Even before United States and Iran talk in Oman this week, the two countries seem to be at opposite sides of the spectrum. US President Donald Trump made a surprise announcement while sitting beside the Israeli Prime Minister at the Oval Office that this Saturday there will be a very big meeting.
We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it. But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully those talks will be successful. And I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen.
But direct talks isn't what Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi talked about. He insisted that the talks with Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff will be indirect, with Omani officials likely negotiating. Now, direct or indirect, if these talks do come through this week, these will be the first official talks between the two nations since 2015, when they had signed a nuclear deal under Barack Obama, the same deal which was ditched by Donald Trump when he came into power. In the recent weeks, Trump wrote a letter to Iran's supreme leader as well, Ayatollah Khamenei, an offer that Iran's president, Pezeshkian, rejected. A lot of what's happening now, remember, dates back to the previous Trump presidency. US wants Iran to completely dismantle its nuclear program, while Iran says that under the 2015 deal, it fully enjoys its right to nuclear energy for peaceful purposes under the relevant articles of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In fact, in 2018, when Trump pulled out of the deal, Iran had retaliated with resuming its nuclear activities to alarming levels. International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi has repeatedly called out Iran for dramatically accelerating its uranium enrichment. So with these talks set to take place, the big question is, will a stronger Trump have his way this time around, or will Iran save itself from the rules of the West? Let's try and decode this for you on Global Mirror today. I'm joined by Raymond Vickery. He's a Senior Associate, Center for Strategic and International Studies and former Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joining us from the United States of America. Burzine Waghmar, Center for Iranian Studies at the SOAS University of London, also joins us. And Professor Madhav Nalapat, Vice Chair, Manipal Advanced Research Group, also a geopolitical expert, joining us this evening. Thank you very much to all of you gentlemen for joining us on Global Mirror. Burzine, let me begin with you. What expectations do you have from these talks? They're happening after a long time. Donald Trump has been quite aggressive in saying that he's going to be putting maximum pressure on Iran, and that if Iran doesn't agree to his conditions as far as the nuclear deal is concerned, all hell will break loose.
Mr. Trump is known to carry out what he says. And Shreya, first things first, President Trump, during Trump 1.0, did send a letter to Supreme Leader Khamenei through the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in 2019. Tehran even refused to accept, much less acknowledge that letter. This time around, it was sent in early March through Dr. Gargash, one of the most senior Emirati diplomats, and a reply did come forth. And from what we gather is this. Firstly, Iran insists on what are indirect talks. It's to show that they will only deign to enter discussions with Washington on the nuclear aspect and nothing else. The nothing else bit referring to its ballistic missile production, and which continues at an alarming, disquieting rate through the Middle East. But and from what I understand, and other sources do, the missive that President Trump conveyed also required Iran to dismantle the PMUs, which are the Popular Mobilization Units, its Shia proxies, which are now ensconced in the Iraqi army. Now, that is subsumed under the Iraqi army, and the question is, obviously, we know Iran backs it because it treats Iraq in more ways than one as a vassal state. That obviously is not going to go down well with Tehran, as well as the fact that President Trump would demand that they dismantle their support for proxies in the region, most notably the Houthis, with whom in September 2024, Tehran brokered with Putin the dispatch of anti-ship missiles, which has caused havoc with global shipping, as we all very well know. And lastly, at
Okay.
least for now, I'll come back later, is that it is believed that Putin has already supplied Tehran with the S-400 Triumph air defense system, which is interesting if you consider that it has been repeatedly delayed to India and now been pushed to early 2026, but apparently Tehran is in possession of that. So that should tell also an Indian audience of where
Okay.
Indo-Russian ties are.
You know, that's what I wanted to get in Raymond Vickery on. Burzine mentioning that interesting point about Putin supplying the kind of weapons that Russia has been to Iran. Raymond Vickery, do you think in this case Iran could leverage its friendship with Russia and sort of, get Donald Trump to agree to a lot of conditions that they want to get through this meeting?
Well, good evening, and thanks very much for having me. I think that the fundamental point here is that while it is welcome that there is some prospect of talks, even though they're indirect, and even though the Iranians will not recognize that you can deal directly on this. The problem is one that Trump really created in the first place by torpedoing the agreement in 2015. There's no question that Iran and Russia are working at least in tandem in order to be able to achieve their own individual results. And that will continue. The idea that you can conduct international relations like some sort of real estate deal and two principals get together in a room and hash it out and it's over is just a non-starter in regard to international relations. The good news is, of course, that, as Churchill once said, that jaw is better than war, and peace, like war, must be waged. But it is going to take a lot of effort from the international community, including India, which has vast interest in regard to Iran, to come together to be able to institutionalize a peace approach as opposed to what is the Trump administration approach at this time.
Okay. Professor Nalapat, how do you see this really panning out? Because you have a Donald Trump who's come back with a second election victory. Obviously, he's emboldened now. He's going all out against what he wants to do, whether it's tariffs or his aggression against China. And now, of course, his attention is towards Iran after all that he's been able to do that he promised to his voters. On the other side is Iran, which seems to be a little weakened this time around because of the kind of situation that prevails around the country, as well as its domestic economy not being very stable, not being very strong. Do you think Iran is in a position to actually negotiate with the US at the moment?
Look, I'd like to point out that as far as Russia and S-400 are concerned, the reality of the situation is that President Putin has got a far bigger target than Iran, and that is the United States under Trump. Under Trump, there's been a 180-degree turn from the Biden administration campaign against Russia, and basically the focus on Ukraine, the focus on Europe, rather than the Indo-Pacific or on Asia. So I'd like to say that I think President Putin will be weighing the risks and advantages very carefully. And if in any way giving S-400 to Iran will jeopardize the ongoing warmth and ties, which it certainly will, I'm not sure that President Putin, being a pragmatic person, will agree to that. The reality is, Shreya, Iran is a clerical regime in Iran, pardon me, is a much more weakened structure than it was before Hamas launched its terror attack, and Hezbollah and the Houthis, and of course Israel retaliated as it had to. The fact is that, as has correctly been said, Hamas and Hezbollah the military capacity has been severely degraded. It's on the way to being eliminated. The same thing will go for the Houthis, despite their bravado. Essentially, they are committing the suicide of their own people, and in a sense, in terms of sacrificing the economy and security and everything else. Even the Revolutionary Guard in Iran has been affected through the very unorthodox tactics used by Israel. So I would say, Shreya, that Iran, frankly, I don't know if it is they will agree or they will not agree, but the reality is the internal situation in Iran is in a very, very precarious situation because of the high rate of unemployment, the high rate of inflation, the multiple problems that have been caused by Western sanctions, and may I add, not US, but Western sanctions. The reality is the people of Iran are getting fed up of the clerical regime, and the clerical regime is in deep trouble internally. Now, I think one of the conditions of this will have to be that the clerical regime has to accept the reality of the existence of the State of Israel. The clerical regime supported organizations that did not recognize even the right of the Jewish people to exist. Forget about the State of Israel, the only Jewish majority state in the world. They did not recognize the right of the Jewish people to exist. That is absolutely a no-starter. There's no way that Donald Trump is going to agree to that. So the clerics will have to swallow that bitter medicine and accept Israel. Will they do that? Well, I can say that would be the only way out for them. And if they don't do that, this kind of situation will continue. Most likely, the attack will come again via Netanyahu, and of course, boosted by the US. Because Trump has made it very clear he is going to give whatever assistance to
Prime Minister
Israel.
Netanyahu, of course, Professor Nalapat has said that if this goes the Libya way, which is dismantle the entire nuclear facility and lift those sanctions by the United States and the entire West, then this would probably work out. But that is not something that Iran agrees with. Burzine, you want to comment on how, Iran's foreign minister has been saying that the first pledge, the first promise that Donald Trump needs to make is that he has to take off the military action threat against Iran if the deal doesn't come through. But, the question again arises, is Iran in a position to put out these kind of conditions for itself in such a deal, in such a scenario where its own domestic challenges are overshadowing everything else?
And you see, the question is of bluster. It is bluster by an extremely discredited, embattled regime at home, and it will not agree, obviously, and would deem any talk of Libya-style dismantling of its arsenal as a non-starter. But then there is the question of the snapback clause, Shreya, which, as part of the 2015 JCPOA agreement, despite Washington having pulled out, will come into effect 2 months from now, this year, subsequently. What does that mean? Let me break that down, because that does touch upon an aspect which had hitherto not been considered, namely inspection of Iran's ballistic missile production in subterranean sites and storage centers, which are all very alarming, in that we've seen them in action. Saudi Arabia, when drone attacks through the Houthis was conducted on Abqaiq oil refinery, American troops who were wounded and killed at the US Al-Assad base in Iraq in 2020, January 2024, when Pakistan's Balochistan province received those missiles, not to mention the same month they were fired at Iraq's Kurdistan Autonomous Region. So we do know what Iran's missile production is, and that, in any case, is in violation of UN Resolution 2231. Point number one. And point number two, when the snapback were to come into place, we all know the sanctions currently, which Iran has faced over so many decades, are devastating. But what would occur with the snapback would be all-encompassing, because it will demand all UN member states to adhere to it. It is binding. It's not one of those fuzzy, non-legal binding ones, which will play havoc with Iran's investments, oil production, and linkages to the global financial system. So Iran has no choice but to bend over. And any such talk of bombing Diego Garcia was again bluster by Iran for the most banal of reasons, that even Iran's most advanced missiles, the MRD one, which was under development as of October 2024, has only a 1,800-kilometer range. It cannot reach deep into the Indian Ocean to take out American aircraft, the B-52 bombers at Diego Garcia. So this is just bluster by an embattled, insecure, desperate regime.
But Raymond, Vickery, one of the arguments that Iran has always given is that why should we be dictated by rules of the West? Why should we not make our nuclear weapons when the US and other European countries already have made their own? Why should we be deterred then? And who are they to dominate us and dictate us the rules of the game? All right, we'll try and reconnect with Raymond Vickery there. We've lost his line. But, the same question to you, Professor Nalapat. The argument that's given by Iran and a lot of other countries is the fact that why should we be dictated by rules of the West?
Well, I'll tell you one reason why, a very good reason, and that is the absolute refusal to accept the existence of the Jewish state. The absolute refusal, frankly, where their proxies are concerned, not explicitly by Iran, but by their proxies, to accept the existence of the Jewish people. Now, that is absolutely unacceptable. There's no way that any deal can be reached with Iran unless it accepts the reality of the Jews having as much right as Muslims or Hindus or Christians or Buddhists or anybody else to live on this planet. Jews have suffered a lot, especially in the last century. They have suffered over millennia, and they're not going to, endure any kind of a hard knock without responding, which they have, thanks to Hamas beginning this war quite some time ago. So the reality is that the reason why there's a difference between Iran, other countries, is its stubborn refusal of the clerical regime to accept the existence of State of Israel. Which is why possibly, Shreya, I've been saying this some time, the way out would probably be the clerical regime giving way, either willingly or because of street power, as happened during the Shah, street power, or willingly, which has happened in South Korea. But it will have to do so in a civilian regime that is agreeable to the existence of the State of Israel, that's agreeable to dismantling of terror networks, supported by Iran, by the clerical regime, takes office. Otherwise, frankly, I don't see a viable way out of the crisis, so long as the clerical regime sticks stubbornly to its stand that the Jewish people, not just the Jewish state, have no right to exist. That is absolutely ridiculous, and that is absolutely not something the international community can ever permit, Shreya.
Okay. Burzine, come in on this. The fact that Donald Trump made this surprise announcement of having this very big meeting on Saturday this week while sitting beside the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu obviously sort of startled him, but he's been reiterating the fact that this should go the Libya way. How do you see Israel's role moving forward with this meeting happening if it does?
Israel will take a wait-and-watch approach with Mr. Trump, partly because Mr. Netanyahu is embattled at home with all sorts of domestic scandals, as we know, and he wants Mr. Trump currently in his corner and not to upset him. And particularly a person like Mr. Trump, who can be rather thin-skinned and would take personal umbrage to anyone opposing him as such. And yes, the regime in Iran thrives on the fact of decimating Israel and, as it says, to wipe it off the page of time, which is the literal rendition in Persian. And you cannot have, because no other state, UN member state, talks like that in such grotesque terms about another fellow member state. So that's simply not on. And Iran does not want to see normalization between the Arabs and the Israeli state, which is why it indulges in mischief-making, murder and mayhem throughout the region. Not to mention that even as talks will commence in Muscat with Steve Witkoff this Saturday, Mr. Trump would realize, and I'm sure he does, that Iran undertook, at least in the planning stages, assassination attempts on him. Not to mention the fact that so many US troops have been murdered and maimed over the decade since the 2003 Iraq War. So this must not be forgotten, and especially so by Mr. Trump, who takes things only too personally as such, because Iran is determined not to see normalization between the Arabs and the Jewish state. That is a driver of its domestic and foreign policy, and in so doing, it can garner mileage with Muslims radicalized elsewhere in the Islamic Ummah, who may perceive the Arabs as being pragmatic,
Okay.
but who are supposedly selling out to Israel. So Iran thrives on such fissures and discontent because it keeps a regime in business which is otherwise discredited at home.
But you know what, Burzine? Look, I'm no sympathizer of either Iran or Donald Trump, but the fact of the matter is that US and Iran made a nuclear deal, then Donald Trump wins the elections, he comes and he withdraws from that deal. So obviously you're giving that one reason to Iran to blame you for the failure of whatever happened. Of course, Iran went on and proliferated and, increased its nuclear activity, that is for sure. But the fact is that it also has the right under NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, that it does go on with its nuclear activities, but uses them for civilian and peaceful purposes.
Which it's not doing. It's pure skullduggery on the part of the Tehran regime to say that it is undertaking a civilian nuclear production and that it has no intent to attack anyone. If the attacks on Israel are anything to go by during the Hamas conflict since 7th October 2023. And may I even go back to the fact that President Obama's deal was a bad deal. It is not hawkish, it is not neoconish to declare that it was a bad deal with one too many gaping holes, and which did afford Iran more than a breather to develop eventually, despite the sunset clause, weapons production, which now, even if the deal had been in place, Shreya, today, as we speak, as of 2025, Iran's ore production will stand at 71 tons, and 60% of enrichment of U-235 has taken place, which in other words, simplistically put, stands at 90% of the homework being completed to transform, to convert natural uranium into weapons-grade material of uranium. So the deal was bad in any case, and Mr. Trump did have a point insofar as I'm concerned from Iranian studies, and Washington was correct to pull out of it. Dovish sorts may believe otherwise, but I do not concur with that view.
Okay, Raymond, Vickery, obviously Donald Trump is looking for a diplomatic solution at this moment. He's not ruling out military action, but of course he's going ahead with a diplomatic solution to this entire tussle. How do you see this moving forward, considering the fact that, Trump and diplomacy have not been very synonymous in the previous times, and this time around as well, he met with Volodymyr Zelensky. He was trying to sort of have that conversation. That didn't work out, at least for the first time. But in terms of the Trump administration going ahead with diplomacy as their option, how do you see that moving forward? All right, there seems to be a bit of a... Raymond, Vickery, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. I'm sorry. Was that I didn't realize that was directed to me. I see this going forward in Oman with talks, and you can characterize them as direct or indirect, but there will be talks. The good news is that President Trump does not want to see another war. His stock in trade in the campaign was that he was going to end wars. He's going to end them in Ukraine. He's going to end them in Gaza. And there is going to be peace and prosperity. Well, he's going about it in a very, very strange way in many instances. But in regard to Iran, it's very significant, of course, that he made this announcement in the presence of Netanyahu. It is not a question that Netanyahu can now go out and attack on his own, it seems to me. The difficulty is, of course, in whether or not you have the institutional approach which will bear results consistently. The fact is that the agreement reached in
okay.
2015 was at least a framework for keeping talking. It's ridiculous to say that that framework, which really never went into effect because of Trump 1.0, gave pause and gave help and support to Iran. So we're at a place where we are talking.
Okay.
I think that's good, but there's a lot of ground to be covered. One hopes that Iran is weakened enough because of its own internal problems. But again, I say it is not going to be just a question of the United States and Iran reaching some sort of agreement, but it will require the international community, India, Europe, across the board, in order to be able to keep this from blowing up and creating another catastrophe like Ukraine, like Gaza, and the flashpoints that we've seen around the world.
Okay, so we'll have to wait and watch how that meeting really pans out, how the negotiations move forward. It is an old conflict, but this time around it has a new timeline, and hopefully it will reach a logical conclusion this time around. I'll wrap it up here. Thank you very much to all of you gentlemen, Raymond, Vickery, Professor Nalapat and Burzine Waghmar, for joining us on Global Mirror and sharing your perspective. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap on Global Mirror. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. News and updates continue on Mirror Now.